Yeah. Yeah. Please, can we mute our mics, please? Can we mute our mic? Please, if you are not talking, kindly mute your mic. Thank you.
You get to hear a bit of the traffic in Lagos there, Mackenzie, probably. There we go.
All right. First, Mr. Festus, confirm you can hear me. I know I'm having a serious network challenge.
Yes, loud and clear. Loud and clear. We can.
Okay, so please, I'm having a serious network challenge. If I step out, if it happens again, please do not hesitate to just take charge, please. All right, I think we'll just go ahead and start because we've given additional 9 minutes and we have about 21 members on call at the moment. I know in our site, Saturdays are usually very busy days for us. We use it to do house chores and all that. Some of us use it to attend their weddings and other events. So creating our time to attend such an event like this shows that we have passion, and we're always looking forward to learning, especially when it comes to the kind of topic that we're listening today. So thank you very much for those of you who made out time to join this meeting. Thank you so much. I look forward to an interesting engagement with Larry. Point in time, I'll yield the floor to the president, Mr. Engineer Shehu, please. President, are you on call?
All right. Thank you very much, Sec. Good evening, fellow professional colleagues, and welcome, Mr. Larry Wilson, to this our webinar today. And this webinar might be our last webinar, probably for the year 2021 to 2022. I would like to appreciate the effort made by my ESCOs, and it's really commendable. And also, I would like to appreciate Mr. Larry Wilson for the enthusiasm he developed in Nigeria. In fact, Mr. Larry Wilson is fairly a Nigerian by our extension. We appreciate you and we make you our own at all the time. For the love you have for Nigerian chapter, it was really a commendable effort. I want to draw our attention to the fact that is part of our aim here is for making sure that we align with SSP global requirement and professional development of our members. So that's why we always, wherever we are, and whoever offers to offer his knowledge, to share knowledge with us, we are there for him to make sure that he extended it to our members. So please, without much waste of energy, let us relax and remain focused as we learn from Mr. Larry Wilson. You are all welcome, and let's grab the knowledge we expected. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Do you want me to just start, you guys, see if I can share the screen and all?
Yes. Okay. Go ahead.
Okay.
Okay, Larry, sorry, I was talking while I didn't know I was on mute. Can you hear me? We're working with the agenda actually. So, but then if you started, let's just do a brief introduction of you. Participants on call, we know just a bit about about you. So, participant Mr. Larry is actually a friend of ASSP. He has always been facilitating most of our programs, especially in behavioral safety. He is known to be the co-CEO of Safe Start International, holds several degrees and masters and BScs and all like. He's very passionate about behavioral safety. So, ladies and gentlemen, please, with a warm welcome, we'll be speaking on defenseless moment, a different perspective on serious injury. So over to you, Mr. Larry. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Hopefully you can all hear me okay. Some of you, when you were talking, you were breaking up a bit. So Mackenzie, just let me know if anything's sort of happening there. The main concepts of Safe Start are on the left, the human factors: rushing, frustration, fatigue, complacency, and the critical errors that those 4 human factors can cause. Eyes not on task, mind not on task, moving into or being in the line of fire, or somehow losing your balance, traction, or grip. And then the course for the employees is about the critical error reduction techniques on the right. In other words, how to teach them how to deal with that state to error risk pattern. Now, currently we're operating in 66 countries. It's been translated into 32 languages. It's over 10,000 work sites, which is about 3,500 different companies, because Procter & Gamble has more than one site, Cargill has more than one site, Caterpillar, John Deere, DuPont, Kimberly-Clark, etc. So about 10,000 individual work sites, a few of them in Nigeria, Etex and Nigerite for sure, as well as Cargill. And then this amounts to about 4,200,000 people. And I think we would have been to 4,500,000 if it hadn't have been for COVID. But certainly the last 2 years were a bit rough for sure. The reason it's gone so far and so fast is that we typically get a 50% decrease in injuries in the first 2 years and 80% over 4 years. But the injury reductions aren't necessarily free. And so over the years, with the help of our clients, we've identified 5 long-term success factors for this process. And I know you can all read, but I'm just going to quickly go through these. And what I'd like you to do is just, if you would, which one do you think would be the most important? I mean, they're all important, but which one do you think would be the most important? So the first is demonstrated buy-in and commitment at all levels of the organization, including participating in the engagement activities. So there's more than just the classroom training, if you will, or the training sessions. There's also engagement activities that go on the shop floor or in the field. Number 2 is proper delivery of the training to all of the employees. And when I mean all of the employees, this includes the managers and the supervisors as well. Because if you look at the next one, commitment to safety 24/7, using the concepts at home and when driving. And the joke I normally make when I'm presenting this at a conference, and I know some of you heard me speak in Abuja, but do any of you really care where you die? Or are you a little more concerned with the when part? Like, hopefully not today, preferably not tomorrow, but where, whether it's in the car, whether it's at work, whether it's at home, that's not really that's not very important to most of us. So everybody can benefit from this training, and that includes the managers and the supervisors. Number 4 is integration of the concepts, the rushing, frustration, fatigue, complacency, and the critical errors into the company's ongoing safety training and safety management system. So incorporating this into near miss reporting, risk assessments, that sort of stuff, compliance training. And then number 5 is that discipline or blame is not part of the process. We all make mistakes. It doesn't matter who you go, where you go. If you ask anybody, how many mistakes have you made? You'll get the same answer, too many. And if you say, how many serious mistakes have you made? You'll get the same answer, too many. So we all make mistakes. The whole idea here is just to help people make fewer mistakes, especially the injury-causing mistakes, and to provide them with an additional layer of self-defense. So the analogy that I usually use is that, yes, there should have been a guardrail at the side of the river, and perhaps the child should have had a life jacket on. But if your kid could swim, your kid would still be alive. So it's not a substitute for the guardrail at the side of the river. It's not a substitute for the life jacket. It's just an additional layer of protection. And you certainly don't blame your children for drowning when you're getting them swimming lessons. You're just trying to provide that extra layer of protection. So I don't know which one you would have thought would have been the most important, but it's a bit of a trick question because any one of the first five can interfere with the efficacy or how well you do with the process. You know, do you get 30, 40, 50% decreases in injuries? Or are you a Cinderella story? You get 80, 90, maybe even 100% decreases in serious injuries. But if you somehow get the discipline or blame thing mixed up, and the people don't believe that you're trying to help them, but you're just trying to find an additional way to blame them for injuries, errors, or incidents, then the whole process can be killed pretty much dead in the water. Now, one of the companies that we work with globally is Givaudan. You may not be familiar with them. They make flavors and fragrances, though, and they're one of the 3 companies in the world that does this. So we're all customers usually of these 3 customers, and as you 3 companies rather. And as you can see, they did very, very well in Latin America. 92% in the Spanish part, 85% in the Portuguese part in Brazil. But if you went to Asia Pacific, they brought these concepts into their incident investigation process as soon as they were finished the first 5 units of the training. And they started blaming people for being frustrated or being tired or being complacent. And it didn't take their employees very long to learn how to say, I was rushing, and the reason I was rushing was because my supervisor was pushing me. So after they'd had about 40 of these investigations in a row where the reason I was rushing was because my supervisor was pushing me, the managers in Asia Pacific concluded that this wasn't working, and they barely got any injury reductions at all. So like I said, we all make mistakes. The purpose is just to try to help people make fewer mistakes, fewer injury-causing mistakes. Now, it's about human factors and critical errors, but the critical error reduction techniques and the concepts of the course are based on 12 distinct paradigm shifts, and we wrote those up into 12 articles, and they were published in safety magazines all around the world: Canada, the United States, Mexico, Colombia, Peru, Chile, Brazil, England, Ireland, Russia, Italy, and with Industrial Safety Review in India. And we turned the 12 articles into 12 chapters, and that became the latest book, Defenseless Moments. Now, I'm not in the 55 minutes here going to have time to go through all 12 paradigm shifts, but I'll certainly try to give you the highlights, if you will, or some of them. So a paradigm shift is a different perspective on something. In this case, it's going to be a different perspective on serious injuries. So if I could encourage you all to sort of keep an open mind, because it is likely going to be a fair bit different than some of the things that you've been taught or perhaps have come to believe. You could also think of this as an additional way to think about safety. So let me see if I can give you sort of the first example here. We all know for someone to get hurt accidentally that there are a number of causal factors. You need to have a source of danger or a hazard, a person or persons involved. And then, since nobody is ever trying to get hurt, something unexpected has to enter the equation. That sets off a chain reaction. And the thinking used to be that where you ended up on the old risk pyramid, whether it was just a close call or whether it was a major injury, was just a matter of luck combined with the overall amount of hazardous energy we're dealing with. And that much is certainly true. A 1 meter fall is normally better than a 5 meter fall, and landing on your feet is usually better than landing on your head. But what about whether the person got the benefit of their reflexes or not? How much do you think that is going to affect where they end up on the old risk pyramid? So if I could, just for a second, I'd like all of you to think about how many times have your reflexes helped you, and how many times have they saved you or somebody else? Like how many times have you had to hit the brake really quickly to avoid hitting another car, truck, or pedestrian? How many times do you think you've lost your balance but managed to regain it without actually falling? I mean, do you think we're talking here about hundreds, thousands, or tens of thousands of times that we've been the beneficiary recipient of our reflexes? And by the way, if you only used your reflexes 3 times a day, that's 1,000 times a year. So would you be willing to drive in a place like Dubai if you didn't have the benefit of your reflexes? How about Lagos? Would you be willing to drive in Lagos without the benefit of your reflexes?
That's one way to.
Or India? Now, I took this picture in India just because it was the only place that I'd ever where they were all wearing their helmets. But what about medium risk work? Would you be willing to do medium risk work without the benefit of your reflexes? How about high risk work? I mean, the first responder in this incident told me that when the contractor heard the horn honk from the big haul truck, meaning that the haul truck was going to move, he dove between the 2 front wheels, and that reflex saved his life. So if you look at industrial safety, it is primarily about keeping the hazardous energy from contacting the person. And we've got engineering controls, administrative controls, personal protective equipment standards, procedures, rules, all of that sort of stuff in the safety management system. Personal safety is much more about helping people to get the benefit of their reflexes. And it's also about the possibility or probability of something unexpected happening in the first place. Now, if you look at industrial safety, it typically follows James Reason's Swiss cheese model. And it kind of makes intuitive sense because in industry, the hazard is sort of a given. And so we've got specific control measures to deal with the hazards, and they're not perfect. They can be deficiencies, kind of like the holes in the Swiss cheese. And if all of the holes line up, you can end up with the unintended consequence or the incident. But on a personal safety basis, when you look at personal safety, you don't know anybody, including yourself, that makes their personal risk assessments based on the specific control measures and whether the deficiencies in the specific control measures all line up and there could be an unintended consequence. Almost everybody makes their own personal risk assessments based on the possibility of the unexpected event happening in the first place. You know, don't worry, it'll be all right as long as nothing goes wrong. It'll be all right as long as we don't make any mistakes, and it'll be all right as long as we all pay attention or we're all careful. That's how people make their own personal risk assessments. So you'd think they'd be a little bit better with this next part here. In other words, we all know something unexpected has to happen, but on a daily basis, there's essentially only 3 categories. Either you do something unexpectedly, somebody else, the other guy, does something unexpectedly, or the equipment breaks or malfunctions and it does something unexpectedly. So I don't get too many arguments from people about the three sources of unexpected events on a daily basis. I mean, obviously there are things like earthquakes and tidal waves and volcanoes, tornadoes, hurricanes, those sorts of things. But thankfully they're not daily. But if you ask people, what do you think the percentages are? What percentage of all total accidental acute injuries do you think are caused by the equipment breaking or failing unexpectedly? What percentage do you think are caused by the other person? And then what would be left over being in the self area? You get all kinds of different perspectives. I mean, typically a room with 30 people, you will find perspective on this question will vary by more than 50%, even 30 safety professionals. So I'd like you to think about, what do you think these percentages are? If you've got access to a pen, pencil, a piece of paper, hopefully you could write them down. And while you're thinking about that, think about your coworkers or your associates. What would they say if we asked them exactly the same question? And then if you wouldn't mind, just write, put a line down in the middle of the piece of paper, and on the left, write down your numbers for self, other people, and equipment. And then on the right, if you would, what do you think your coworkers or associates would say for self, other people, and equipment? And again, this is all total accidental acute injuries on or off the job, on the highway. Like I said earlier, most of us aren't particularly fussy about where we die. We're a little more concerned with the when. So let me give you a couple seconds to just write a few numbers down. I have no idea where that yellow arrow is coming from as well on the slides. It's kind of interesting. Okay, well, hopefully you got a chance to write a few things down. But one of the things that I found very early on when I was trying to find reliable data on these three sources of unexpected events is that the data can be filtered right at the source. We really don't know whether the person fell asleep at the wheel or whether a dog, deer, cow, or kangaroo ran out in front of them. And we don't know whether what they told the police was the truth either. Because in Canada and the United States, if you tell the police officer that you fell asleep at the wheel, you can get a 6-point ticket for undue care and attention, and your insurance is going to go up 100%. So you're much better off to say that a deer ran out in front of you and you swerved. Now, in Canada and the United States, if you say a kangaroo ran out in front of me, you're probably going to get thrown in jail for drinking and driving. But like I said, the data can easily be filtered at the source. So 30 years ago, 1992, I started getting people to build their own personal risk pyramids because we know how often we've been hurt and we know how seriously. So I'd start off with the lost time accidents or the major injuries. How many broken bones, torn ligaments, dislocations, concussions, comas, third-degree burns, ruptured spleens, punctured lungs, crushed tailbones? How many of those have you experienced so far this lifetime? 0 to 4, 5 to 10, or 10 plus? And then I'd ask about recordable injuries or minor serious injuries. Stitches, significant muscle strains where you had to take muscle relaxers or pain medication, or things like a sprained ankle. How many of those have you had so far this lifetime? 5 to 10, 11 to 15, or 15 plus? And the average for the first 125,000 people that I asked was 3 to 7 major injuries, 8 to 12 minor serious injuries. So I'd just like you to reflect for a second on your own personal injury history. Are you higher, lower, or about the same as that average? Now, when you come down one more level, This is fairly interesting. How many cuts, bruises, bumps, and scrapes do you think you've sustained so far this lifetime? Hundreds or thousands? I mean, how many times have you said, ow, or worse in reaction to accidental pain? Now, a lot of people, if they're just thinking about their adult life, will say hundreds. But if you get them thinking about the first 10 years of their life, very quickly they start recalculating those numbers. I mean, most little kids have got somewhere between 10 and 20 visible cuts, bruises, bumps, and scrapes on them. So if we just use the lower end of 10, because it's easy math, times 50 weeks in a year, that's 500, times 10 years, that's 5,000 by the time we're 12, assuming you started walking when you were around 2. But then you'd also have to start counting all the things that still happen to you as an adult. Banging your shin, stubbing your toe, dropping something on your foot. Now, I usually get about this far, and you can sort of see people rolling their eyes in the audience going, so what? Big deal. Well, if you look at an audience of 100 people and you say, how many of you have broken a toe or broken a bone in your foot? You're going to get 10 to 15 hands up in the air for that. Quite often, just presenting to 20 or 30 people, you'll get somewhere between 3 to 4 hands up in the air for that. And if you broke your big toe, you know that it's not just a little deal, like it really affects your balance. Now you look at the next one, number 4, falling down the stairs or falling up the stairs, even more embarrassing. But almost every company with at least 1,000 folks has got a couple recordables every year, people falling on stairways. Not seeing a stop sign or a red light and going through an intersection blind. 25% of the serious vehicle collisions occur at intersections in most countries. Falling asleep or almost falling asleep at the wheel is 20 to 30% of the fatal car accidents in most countries. Now, turning or bumping into something or standing up and banging your head. How many times have you done that? Hitting your hand with a hammer, by my guess is you can't count. Cutting yourself with a knife, scissors, or razor, burning your hand, arm, or wrist, spraining an ankle, knee, wrist, or thumb, straining your back, neck, or shoulder, or falling into or onto something hard or sharp. Most adults have experienced all 13 of those. And if you think about the things like banging your shin, stubbing your toe, cutting yourself with a knife or a razor, most of us can't begin to count how many times we've done that. So now most people are freely admitting somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 cuts, bruises, bumps, and scrapes. Now, when we just look at the minor injuries to majors or recordables to lost time, typically at most companies, that was a 10-to-1 ratio. And at 10-to-1, you could certainly say random chance or luck. And so since we didn't really have reliable data in terms of all of the cuts, bruises, bumps, and scrapes from the first aid room, we never really got the 5,000 or 10,000. And so we just sort of got told that the only difference between the levels on the risk pyramid was just luck combined with the overall amount of hazardous energy you were dealing with. And like I said, at 10-to-1, you could say random chance or luck. But at 1,000-to-1, we all know we should have been looking for an assignable cause, but we just didn't have reliable data for the cuts, bruises, bumps, and scrapes, and very few of us were ever keeping track of it on a personal basis. But if we had known it was 1,000-to-1, then we probably would have been looking for an assignable cause. But probably the most interesting category on the whole risk pyramid is how many close calls or near misses have you had that could have easily ended up at the very top of the risk pyramid? So now you'd have to count every time, you've fallen asleep or almost fallen asleep at the wheel. going through the intersection without seeing the stop sign or the red light. Anytime you fell backwards off your bike when you were a kid, you weren't wearing a helmet. All of those things you'd have to count. So do you think the potentially fatal close calls in your life are 0 to 10, 10 to 20, 20 to 30, or 30 plus? And again, if you're looking for 80% of the hands in the air, it'll be at 30 plus potentially fatal close calls. So we've all been fairly lucky. Now, if you look at those potentially fatal close calls, the 30 plus, obviously we'd be a lot better off if we could replace that luck with skill, or in this case, with the 4 critical error reduction techniques. So let me just get you thinking about the serious injuries, because they're usually the only ones you can remember well. How many of you have been seriously hurt, or as I used to say, stitches or worse, because the equipment or the car you were driving broke, failed, or malfunctioned? In other words, the wire rope snapped, the hose burst, the seal failed, the traffic light started working incorrectly, your brakes failed. How many of you have been seriously hurt because the equipment or the car you were driving broke or malfunctioned? And normally, if you've got 100 people in front of you, just for easy math, you'll get 2 to 3 hands in the air for that question. Now, when you ask about the other guy doing something unexpectedly, you have to factor out sports where the other person might be intentionally trying to hurt you, even if it isn't part of the game. And you definitely have to factor out sports like hockey and American football, where it is part of the game. Those aren't necessarily accidental injuries. But if you were the passenger in a car wreck and you got hurt, stitches or worse, unless somehow you could have reached over, grabbed the steering wheel, or hit the brake with your foot, I don't know what you could have done about it. So that would definitely count in this category. But again, if you've got 100 people in front of you, you will likely only get 10 to 15 hands up in the air for this category. And if you say, how many of you have more than one example of being seriously hurt by the other guy? Now you're going to have 500 or 600 people in front of you before you see that second hand in the air. And for those of you who were in attendance at the conference in Abuja, I think we had about 80 people in the audience the day that I was speaking there. And there were 0 hands up in the air when I said, how many of you have got more than one example of being seriously hurt because the other guy did something unexpectedly? But if you have just 30 people in front of you and you say, how many of you have been hurt, stitches or worse, at least once in the self area, you will get over 90% of the hands in the air. And then if you bring it down to include all of the cuts, bruises, bumps, and scrapes, and you start thinking about how many times when you banged your shin or stubbed your toe, did the coffee table do something unexpectedly? How many times when you cut yourself shaving, did somebody bump into you? Now people start freely admitting that 97 to 99% of the time, it wasn't the equipment and it wasn't the other guy. Now, this is consistent with what the British Safety Council says about auto accident causation, a little bit higher in Canada and the United States, but they're lumping together the other guy and the self area. But of course, the other guy is somebody's self, if you think about it too, right? So 97 to 99% of the time, it wasn't the equipment and it wasn't the other guy in terms of that first domino that fell. So did any of you have 97 to 99% written down for what your coworkers or associates would say for those 3 sources of unexpected events? Because if you did, you're going to be the first person in 4,200,000. But you could also see what I was saying at the beginning about the blame versus help. In other words, if you didn't take this the right way, you could say, okay, now they're going to blame us for everything. But it's actually very empowering because we can't control the traffic lights out there on the motorways, and we certainly can't control the other drivers. But we could all do a much better job of controlling ourselves, provided we got better tools than what our parents or grandparents handed down, which is try to pay attention, try to be more careful. And then when you got hurt, see, you weren't careful enough, or you need to pay more attention next time. I mean, that really wasn't a big help. So it's actually a very empowering message, but it's important that people take it the right way and they view it as help versus blame, or giving you the ability to exert more control in a situation versus less control. Okay, so now can you think of a time you've been hurt in the self area where you didn't make any one or a combination of those 4 critical errors? In other words, it wasn't the equipment, it wasn't the other guy that did something unexpectedly, and you didn't make any one or a combination of those 4 critical errors. You were looking at what you were doing. You were thinking about what you were doing, including the risk. You were aware of the line of fire or what could be coming at you, and you were at least conscious of losing your balance, traction, or grip. Okay, now, can you think of a time in the self area you've been hurt where you weren't rushing, you weren't frustrated, or you weren't overly tired? Because just that filter alone for most people is good for 50 to 60% of their injuries. Now, complacency is a bit of a tricky word, even for folks native English. But in Spanish, Portuguese, and Russian, it means excessive or foolish confidence, which is much more like the second stage of complacency. But everybody understands the concepts. When you first start doing something, like riding your bike, it takes 100% of your skill and concentration just to balance on the bike. And if you're like me, you probably still fell a couple of times too. But after a while, you get the hang of it. And after a period of time, we will all come to the first stage of complacency, where the skill or the fear is no longer preoccupying, which means that our minds can wander. Now, you go along a little bit further in time, and you get to the second stage of complacency, which is much more like the Spanish, Portuguese, or Russian definition. And this is where most of us are with the car. We don't get in the car scared, but you nearly get hit by a big transport truck changing lanes without signaling, could have easily squashed you. Well, yeah, now you're thinking about the risk, but it required that external stimulus. There's no more internal stimulus or fear. And unfortunately, when people get to that second stage of complacency, it can really start to affect their decision-making. So if you've ever heard one of your coworkers say, "Oh yeah, well, I've been doing it this way for 20 years and I've never been hurt yet," you can pretty much bet that they're a little bit past that second stage of complacency. Now, when we get to the first stage of complacency, where the risk is no longer preoccupying, which means that our minds can wander, what a lot of people don't realize is that we don't give our minds permission to wander when we get to this stage. It happens without our permission. And it's not like any of us were driving for a couple of years and we said, you know what? I got this, so now I can just drive on autopilot if I want to. But we all did end up driving on autopilot, and none of us made a conscious decision to do it. And the reason for this is because there's a part of our brains called the reticular activating system, and its whole job is to filter out noise, like literally the noise of the birds in the trees, so our ancestors could hear the rustle in the grass, know that was a snake, and get out of the line of fire. So we are hardwired to filter out anything that isn't new or different, important, interesting, or pleasurable. I mean, they all did manage to procreate. So you can't really stop people from getting to the first stage of complacency, which means you can't really stop their mind from wandering or thinking about something else. And if you're thinking about something else other than what you're doing, like driving, you're not going to be on guard for anything unexpected happening. That in and of itself isn't too big of a risk. However, if your eyes then also go off task, you're not thinking about the risk, you're not thinking about what you're doing, and now you're not going to see it or see it coming, which means you won't get the benefit of your reflexes. And for that moment, you will be defenseless. Now, it gets a little bit worse than that because, like I said, you can't really stop complacency from getting, once people get to that first stage, you can't really stop complacency from leading to mind not on task. But now, if you're just in a bit of a rush, you'll likely be thinking about why you're rushing or what will happen if you're late. If you're a bit frustrated, you'll be thinking about who or what is making you frustrated, or you'll be trying to solve the problem in your head. And if you're a little bit tired, you'll be thinking about when can I take a break or maybe even get some rest. So you don't have to have a problem with rushing. Some people do. You don't have to have a problem with frustration or anger management. Some people do. And you don't have to have a problem with fatigue. I think we all do. You just have to be in a bit of a rush, a bit frustrated, or a bit tired. And now with all of that combined with that baseline level of complacency, you'll be even more inclined to take your eyes off task, to look at that mobile phone while you're driving. And so what happens is you'll have defenseless moments. But if you think about this in the workplace, when you first started welding, it took almost 100% of your concentration just to make a good weld. But after 5 or 10 years, you can do a lot more of it without needing to think about it. And after 10 or 15 years, you can do a whole lot more without needing to think about it. So unfortunately, as people get more skilled, more competent, and more experienced with the job, they are likely going to be able to do more and more of it without needing to think about it, which means they will have more and more defenseless moments. And if you actually look at the data, and this is from 400 fatal injury reports, not the summaries, the whole grisly report, what you find is that 47 to 71% of the time, a reflex would have either lessened it or prevented it altogether. But perhaps more alarming, over 45% of these things happen to people over 50 years old with lots of experience. Like the number of these reports that would start out with 58-year-old journeyman electrician, 59-year-old journeyman carpenter, 61-year-old journeyman pipe fitter. I mean, it just went on and on and on. Now, there were some other ones too, like 14-year-old female farmhand that were also pretty hard. Well, they were all hard to read. I could only read about 20 of them a day, actually. It was pretty depressing, but over 45% the people were over 50 years old. So if you think about your own personal close calls that could have killed you, why didn't it kill you? I mean, was it just blind luck? I mean, in some cases, yes. But I would imagine for most of us, the majority of times it's because at the very last second, we got the benefit of our reflexes. Now, just before COVID hit, the last road trip I was on, it started in Germany and went around Europe for a while. Then I went to the Middle East, and then I went to India, then the Philippines, and then home. But the first company, we were doing a leadership session. This was Monday morning in Hamburg, Germany. And they do maintenance on a wind farm in the North Sea. So it's a very inhospitable environment. They're obviously working at heights. I mean, typically what we would think of as high risk. They hadn't had a lost time accident in 2 years out there in the wind farm. But Saturday afternoon, and this session was Monday morning, Saturday afternoon, one of their guys, he was about 52 years old, was unloading a small fork truck from the back of a flatbed transport truck, fell 1.5 meters to the pavement, hit his head, and died. And we had to start the session off with a minute of silence for the man and his family. So I know that this makes perfect intuitive sense to you, you know, as the probability of severity goes up, the probability of occurrence goes up. It seems like the high risk area would be in the red, the upper right-hand quadrant. But when it's dangerous, we pay more attention. How much does that change the risk? Or maybe more importantly, how much does the risk change when you're not paying attention to what you're doing? So if you think about what is the most dangerous thing you've ever done, or what are the 2 most dangerous things you've ever done? And it could have been at work, but most likely it would be away from work: mountain biking, rock climbing, surfing, windsurfing, whitewater rafting, scuba diving. Now, not just, I don't want the category like scuba diving. I want you to think about the time when you were scuba diving and you saw sharks and you realized you had a cut on your right forearm. In other words, I'm looking for the instance within that category when you were the most scared or your heart was beating the fastest. For most of us, it's high-speed driving, either on a motorcycle or in a car. So think about the most dangerous thing, or the 2 most dangerous things you've ever done. Now, the next question's easy. What's the worst injury you've ever had? Or what are the 2 worst injuries you've ever had? And then the last question, do you have a match? In other words, did your worst injury come from the most dangerous thing you ever did? Did your second worst injury come from the second most dangerous? Do you even have a match within the top 2? Because if you do, that would be very unusual. Speaking to 2,300 people at the National Safety Council in Indianapolis, we had 8 hands in the air. So, although this makes perfect sense to you, it isn't what happened to you. And yes, there will be a couple of people that die falling from heights, but for every one of those, you're going to have a couple of people that slipped and fell on the sidewalk, or like the guy from the wind farm company, fell from 1.5 meters and died. But the majority of the serious injuries and fatalities are now coming from the middle. And we've known this in terms of high voltage. There's 1,000 electrocutions in North America every year. Only 100 of them are at high voltage. There's about 1,000 people in North America, Canada, and the States that die falling from heights at workplaces every year, out of 14, 15,000 people that die slipping and falling. So although the risk matrix seems to make perfect intuitive sense, like I said, it isn't actually doing a very good job of predicting the actual outcomes. And I realize this is very counterintuitive. On the other hand, that actually makes sense too, because people have been getting hurt for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. Your grandmother got hurt, your great-grandmother got hurt, your great-great-grandmother got hurt, and your great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother got hurt. And if all of them could have figured it out, don't you think they would have had something better to pass down to us than try to be more careful next time? So, what do we really know here? Well, the no reflex and not getting the reflex is your assignable cause. That's the reason for that 1,000-to-1 ratio there. So what we need to do is we need to bring this in to the workplace. We need to bring this aspect of personal safety into the workplace. So the easiest way to start with people is to give them some safety-related habits that will help to compensate for complacency leading to mind not on task. So if I could get you to look over these 5 safety-related habits on the screen, if you could only put effort into one of those habits, or you were limited to only being able to improve one of those 5 habits, which one of those 5 would give you personally the most benefit? Okay, well, most people will pick number 3 as their number 1. Move your eyes first before you move your hands, feet, body, or car. But it depends a lot on what you do for work. People who work at heights will typically pick number 1 as their number 1. Look at and test your footing or grip before you commit your weight. People who ride motorcycles will typically pick number 4. Look for line of fire potential before moving in terms of blind corners, blind alleyways, that kind of stuff. Industrial mechanics will typically pick number 2. Look carefully at anything you're going to stick your hand into or rest your hand on, because they're forever having to stick their hands into places where they can't see very well. And then mothers and construction workers typically pick number 5. Because, we ask our kids to clean up their toys and stuff, but they don't always do it. So like I said, mothers and, construction sites, rebar cords, hoses on the ground, you got to watch where you're walking. So it depends a bit. Now, all 5 of these are important for almost everybody, but it's difficult to work at 5 things at once. So we'll get the people to put this list in their own priority order for themselves so that they can make the learning and the improvement as efficient as possible. Okay, now that we all kind of know that complacency isn't a character flaw, and I can't tell you how many senior managers have come up to me over the course of my career saying, things like, I can't believe that somebody could get complacent with 13,800 volts. And I'm like, well, same way you got complacent driving 100 kilometers an hour and falling asleep at the wheel. It's exactly the same process, okay? So can you now think of a time you've been hurt in the self area where you weren't rushing, you weren't frustrated, you weren't overly tired, and you hadn't become so complacent with the hazards that you just weren't thinking about them at that instant? And so what you find is that 97 and 99% of the time, it's one or more of those 4 states causing or contributing to one or more of those 4 critical errors. But the important thing is that the states come before the errors, which means we can use the active states, the ones you can feel in the moment, the rushing, frustration, and fatigue, as a trigger to keep yourself from making a critical error. So as soon as you realize you're rushing, instead of thinking about why you're rushing or what'll happen if you're late, you need that first thought to be eyes, mind, line of fire, balance, traction, grip. If you were going to teach this to your kids and they're running for school or running for the school bus and they're worried about, what am I going to tell the teacher? Is she going to send me down to the principal's office? Am I going to get in trouble? No, you got to teach them that first thought has got to be eyes, mind, line of fire, balance, traction, grip. I mean, you get hit by a car on your way to school or your way to the school bus, you're not going to have to worry about school today. And twice as many children die accidentally as adult workers every year. So that is the first and the most important critical error reduction technique. Learn how to trigger on the active states, the ones you can feel in the moment, so you don't make a critical error. But you can't self-trigger on complacency because it's a passive state. And as I said before, it leads to mind not on task. But if you're not thinking about what you're doing, then your behavior, by definition, will be what you do normally or automatically or habitually. So we're going to have to get people to put a bit of effort into improving their safety-related habits, like the exercise we just went through before. Which one of those that you're going to think is going to help you the most, put some effort into that, and then whatever you pick for your number 2, start working on it, then number 3, and so on. So we get some people to put some effort into their safety-related habits. That really helps to compensate for complacency leading to mind not on task. But unfortunately, if you add enough rushing or frustration to the situation, the chemicals that are released in your brain will override those new habits and take you right down to your baseline habits in your subcortex. So the earlier you start learning these skills and habits, the better. And we've been teaching kids these concepts and techniques all over the world for the last 20 years. This was in Lagos a couple months ago after the conference in Abuja. And I must say, this was one of the most rewarding moments in my career. These children were adorable. And they just loved the videos. Just loved it.
My fuck you never asked.
So, like I said before, for those of us who didn't get the benefit of learning all of these habits at an early age, we're susceptible to the rushing and the frustration, which is why I said before, the self-triggering technique is typically the most important for most people. Now, you can't stop people's minds from wandering, but that doesn't mean you couldn't give them efficient tools to help get their mind back on task or back on the risk. And so when you watch other people and you see these state to error risk patterns, it'll almost automatically make you think more about what you're doing. But again, you've got to think about the reticular activating system. It's got to be different. Now, the first time I saw people riding the center line in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and they're ducking underneath the mirrors for the transport trucks and their motorcycles. I mean, my RAS is lighting up for these guys. But if you grew up in Mexico City, Manila, Mumbai, or Lagos, I mean, you've been seeing this all your life. It's business as usual. Now, hopefully you don't see something like this every day. And if you did, you'd be a little more mindful walking down the steps. But like I said, you've got to almost train yourself to look for those state to error risk patterns. Kind of the same way most safety professionals have trained themselves to look for hazards. And you can walk through an area with a supervisor and you can see things that that supervisor doesn't see anymore. Okay. Now, like I said, hopefully you wouldn't see something like this every day and you'd be a little more mindful walking down the steps, maybe even hold a handrail. And then the last technique is that we would like people to be able to learn from the little mistakes or the close calls where it's free. We all learn from the serious ones, but most of us haven't slipped and fallen and broken enough bones or been hurt seriously to be able to put the pattern together. But if you think about losing your balance, we've all done it thousands of times. So when you lose your balance, instead of going, oh, that's weird, you want to think about, was this a state like rushing, frustration, or fatigue that I didn't self-trigger on quickly enough? Or if it was more like complacency leading to mind not on task, then it's probably a safety-related habit that still needs more work, or we got to put a bit more effort into watching other people for those state to error risk patterns. So that part of the technique is going to help you learn from the freebies, from the very small errors, if you will, and it gives us all the ability to continually improve without having to learn from the serious ones. But the second part of this technique is to think about how it could have been worse. You lose your balance, you look over your right shoulder, it's grass, you look over your left shoulder, it's the concrete sidewalk and a curb, could have broken an elbow or worse, hit your head. And when you contemplate the worst case scenarios, eventually what happens is that neural pathways are created in your brain, and it starts to associate the states and the critical errors with danger. Whereas normally rushing, frustration, and fatigue, you tend to associate those with annoyance, okay? And building neural pathways in your brain is about as exciting as creating a path in the grass. 10 or 20 people walk over the grass, you get the beginning of a path. 100, 200 people walk over it, the path gets wider and faster. So very quickly, everybody, what's 3 times 4? Probably all got the answer, 12, right there. Now, what's 13 times 14? Okay, 13 times 13, 169, 170, 182. Yeah, we can do it. I mean, most of us anyhow, without pulling our phones out and using the calculator. But it took a couple of moments. And in those moments, what can happen? So we've got to teach people these critical error reduction techniques, but we've got to teach them well enough that they can actually use them at the speed of life. And if you're going 100 kilometers an hour, you're traveling 27.7 meters a second. That's no time for pulling the card out of your pocket. And what was that third technique that Larry talked about? It'll all be over, right? So we've got to learn how to teach this stuff well. So we developed a very robust learning lesson plan, learning design. There are 5 units to the first part of the course. They all go through this exact same lesson plan. Each unit takes about 2 hours, and you would do 1 unit approximately once a month, is the way most companies do it. But this was designed so that a non-professional trainer can teach these concepts to their coworkers on whatever shift they happen to be working, make it very cost effective and very flexible. So that's another reason why we've managed to get to 66 countries and 4.2 million people with this, is that we made it also easy enough for companies to implement this on their own. Now, you can also, if people missed a class, they can take the lesson online, either on a computer or on a mobile cell phone. Now, we've also got 4 videos. You got to see or hear a little bit of it when I was showing the kids there in Lagos at the school. But the first one is about hard, sharp, hot, and slippery. The basic hazards that get little kids hurt on a daily basis, or if you will, hazard recognition, which is where we all start in industry too. But we also know in industry that hazard recognition, although it's a good start, is not enough. So after the first episode, now we start to bring in Mr. Complacency, Miss Fast, Mr. Tired, and Miss Angry. And now that the kids that we turn into superheroes have to teach the other children, not just the hazard recognition, but also the critical error reduction.
Uh-oh, we've got bandit activity.
Retinal scan accepted. Hello, Mr. McKenzie.
Ready, Aaron? Let's go kick some bandit butt. Outbusters!
Like I said, the kids just love these videos. All 4 of them were about $2 million, about $500,000 each to produce them. So they're made, if you will, sort of movie quality with an 8K red camera. I don't know if that would mean much to you folks, but same camera that Spielberg would use, if you will. And there's also coloring activity books to supplement the learning that we pass out to the kids as well, okay? And it would certainly be my hope that we could get these videos to all the schools in Nigeria before all of us that are listening on this call are dead and gone. Because like I said, twice as many children die accidentally as adult workers, but the number of disabling injuries just in North America is 2.3 million a year to children and youth. So it's huge. Now, by giving them things to take home and engage with their family, this also gives us the ability to tap into the highest form of retention. When you have to turn around and teach something to somebody else, that's when you learn it the best. So they actually come back to work, having learned this stuff even better than what we taught them in the classroom, by having to go home and engage with their families and their children. And it's also a great source of motivation, because if you ask almost anybody, do you care more about your family's safety than your own? Everybody says their family safety. So, like I said, we've got a way of teaching these critical error reduction techniques so that we get people to the 3x4 level. So they're never going to forget it. They're never going to get it wrong, and they can use it instantly and get the benefit of the reflexes. Now, when I first started bringing this pattern to North America 23 years ago, I had a lot of safety professionals from the ASSE back then saying, you should never be allowed to speak at a safety conference again because you're just blaming the worker. So again, you might have wondered why so much emphasis at the beginning on help versus blame. But I've been dealing with this for 23 years. And there's a huge difference, like I said, between helping people and blaming them. But, I kind of thought this was also a bit hypocritical back then, because if you think about industrial safety management systems and eliminating the possibility of something unexpected happening from causing risk of personal injury, we have had all kinds of engineering controls and barriers to stop that from happening in the first place. Interlocks, you walk into the cage, the robots stop. Lockout, tagout's a great example. Somebody hits the start button by mistake, nothing can move because it's all locked out. I mean, we've even got car keys now where you have to lock the car with the keys, so you can't lock the keys inside the car. And we've had stuff at the back end. Like I mentioned the life jacket before, but the seatbelt on the car, the helmet on the motorcycle, the fall arrest harness. Now, nobody ever said that the fall arrest harness prevented somebody from losing the balance, traction, or grip in the first place. But it did a great job of keeping people from falling to their death. So all of that front end elimination and back end mitigation stuff was all good. But as we all know, it wasn't enough. I mean, we were still having serious injuries and fatalities, even with all of that front end and back end control. Then you enter the mobile phone. Now, I don't know about you, I wouldn't be willing to give up my phone, but I think we'd all admit that in terms of eyes and mind on task, when people are moving, the mobile phone has not been everybody's best friend. So we've had stuff at the front end. We've had stuff at the back end for years and years. We just didn't have anything to stop the critical errors, or the states from causing the critical errors. So now we've got the critical error reduction techniques. And this is what I meant when I said it's an additional way to think about safety. It's not designed to replace sound engineering or good management practices, and it's not intended to replace specific training on workplace hazards. It's just about keeping the hazards you know about in mind and in sight, on the job, off the job, and on the highway. So once people learn the critical error reduction techniques well, it doesn't just get limited, though, to critical errors like line of fire and balance, traction, grip that can put you into contact with hazardous energy. you also end up eliminating serious performance errors. Nobody's ever trying to make any serious quality errors, production errors, or errors related to customer service, customer relations either. So what you find is that not only does safety improve, but you also get significant improvements with other key performance indicators. Like Nucor Steel, as you can see, did really well with safety, but they also got a 53.5% decrease in cost per ton. Honda in North America and Canada, 60% at work, 67 to 75% away from work, but they saved $2.3 million in first run defects. And that was just in Canada. And the combination of quality and safety improvements is what took it to the rest of Honda in North America, which was about 13,000 folks. GH Metal Solutions, already 10 times better than the national average for safety, got almost a 50% decrease in defects per million. Goodness. Kimberly-Clark got a 20% improvement in asset conversion. Goodness gracious. Quadrant Plastics got a 25 to 45% decrease in scrap. Scott Forge, 40% decrease in customer complaints. Procter & Gamble got a 70% decrease in unscheduled downtime. So what we're looking for is sort of like what happened with ETEX in Latin America, 7 years of decreasing injuries, decreasing severity. This is one of their plants in Nigeria. Now it's about 440 days, no lost time. The other plant, Nigerite in Lagos, has now gone 2.5 years, no lost time, for about 580 people, which is really phenomenal. But what really impressed me was their parking lot. There's not one sign there that says back your car in, but there's a fair bit in Safe Start that says, hey, you're going to either back your car in or back your car out. But when you back your car in, nothing's moving. Whereas when you're backing your car out, cars can be moving. And if you're at the shopping mall, there can be things like little kids that are hard to see. So like I said, you're going to back it in or you're going to back it out either way. Why not back it in when nothing's moving? But this is, I think, what everybody's looking for, a culture of voluntary compliance versus policed compliance. So we try to get the companies we work with to look at more than just the recordable injuries and the serious injuries. We try to get them to look at all of the key performance indicators that could be affected by human error. So, things like scrap, rework, unscheduled downtime, customer complaints, shipping errors, accounting errors, billing errors, and wherever you can, putting dollar value to those things. Now, I realize for something like an increase in proactive safety efforts or an improvement suggestions, the best you can do is notice a % increase. It's hard to put a dollar value or a monetary value on it. But things like unscheduled downtime, shipping errors, things like that, you can. And you can start to look at the whole cost. Now, this was just for 1 year, 1,004 employees, and it cost them about $109,000 to do this. So a 300% return on investment. But typically you want to show more than just the recordables and the serious injuries. So that was just 1 year. I realize for most of us listening, that culture change, sustained culture change takes more than 1 year. We've asked thousands of our customers, literally thousands of them, how long for sustained culture change. And as you can imagine, nobody said 1 year. We've had a couple of folks that were kind of hoping they could get it in 2 years, but almost everybody said 3 to 5 years, a few folks saying 6 to 7. So we built a 4-year curriculum for all of this. In the amount of time we've got here, everybody, I really just tried to give you a feel for, if you will, the core units in the first year. And as I mentioned before, the training sessions, there's 5 units. They take about 2 hours each, and you do one approximately once a month. You can also deliver the course online. but that's basically for the folks who miss the classroom sessions, because part of it are the table group discussions where people are going to share stories about falling asleep at the wheel or going through a stop sign or a red light without seeing it, nearly hitting a mother with a kid walking across the street or something. And when people start sharing these stories, it now starts to become real for everybody. So typically the first 5 units are done in the class. Yes, you can make up the sessions online if somebody missed one, or you can make them up on the mobile device. But there's more to the mobile device than just delivering the training program. We can also engage the workers and the contractors with a very simple engagement tool called Rate Your State. And simply, you just go out and ask somebody on a scale of 1 to 10, how much rushing, frustration, fatigue, and complacency have you had to deal with so far today? Not your whole life, just so far today or on this shift. And then we can start to get metrics, or if you will, dashboards that will tell us approximately how much rushing, frustration, fatigue, and complacency have you got in this area or on this shift. And if you found, for instance, that rushing and frustration were really high on second shift, you want to go out there and find out what's going on. Now, when you actually start talking to the people, you realize that the reason they're rushing and the reason they're frustrated is because the folks on first shift aren't cleaning up the work area properly and they're not restocking the bins, which means the people on second shift have got to start off cleaning up the area and restocking the bins, which puts them behind on their production quota and also causes a fair bit of frustration because they're doing the stuff that the folks on first shift should have finished up properly. So the problem actually wasn't on second shift. The problem was at the end of the first shift. Okay, so now you got to get out and deal with those folks as well too. And what this will do is it'll give you barometer-like predictability. And as most of you know, the barometer doesn't tell you what hour or what minute the storm is coming. It's just telling you that a storm is coming, right? So you know if you don't get out there and fix what's going on at the end of first shift, the rushing and frustration on second shift are going to likely lead to a problem. So the other thing we can do with the app or with mobile technology is we can help give you some reminders for the habits. So say you pick move your eyes first before you move your hands, feet, body, or car. Once or twice a week, we can send out push notifications or a text to you that says move your eyes first. But there's also an alarm function in there or a time scroll so that you can make sure that you don't get these text reminder messages while you're operating the crane or operating the fork truck. In other words, you can set when you're going to get the notices. Now, the other thing is you can post your own safe start stories on your company feed, but also on the general feed so that you can see how many likes you get from the 4.2 million people out there in the safe start world all over the place. Now this one, this poor guy. Now I'm going to let you watch the next two and you decide who's the luckiest here. And you should be able to see this, but she actually walks away from this. And so does this guy. Now this one, it just shows it a bit at the beginning again, in case you missed it. And so the other thing is getting people to report personal close calls or near misses in the self area. And this part is anonymous. In other words, you've got your own PIN. so that nobody can see the close calls you're reporting but you. Your supervisor can see the area or the shift, but not individuals. And when you make it anonymous like this, you end up with a huge increase in near miss reporting. This is WR Grace in Latin America, but as you can see, 7, 8, 900% in some months improvement in near miss reporting. So you've got the app-based learning as well too, the 5 units of the course on there. So it's rate your state, personal close calls, the story feed, the push notifications on the habits, and you get the dashboards as well as the online training as well. In the background to all of this, there's a steering committee that runs the process. It doesn't, usually a couple folks from the HSE department are on the steering committee, but it isn't totally a burden on the safety and health and environmental professionals at the company. You want to get some other help, usually 6 people on a steering committee, and every task is laid out with timelines and checklists so that as a senior manager, you also get dashboards of how everything is progressing according to the timelines, make sure everything's on track. And this is new. It's not quite finished yet, but it's 14, 10-minute lessons where we are basically trying to, for all of the folks who can't get to the classroom. Well, that's a really good question.
Cut.
What?
The line is interesting.
Really?
Good thing that lid was on.
Yeah, it's still better not to make the mistake in the first place.
Yeah, right. All right, let's take it from the top.
Mhm.
How many mistakes have you made, Larry?
Well, that's a really interesting question. But what's even more interesting is that you'll get exactly the same answer from anybody, anywhere in the world. And it doesn't change even if you ask about serious mistakes. You still get exactly the same answer. Watch. Hey, Olawale, how many serious mistakes have you made so far this lifetime?
Too many, man.
Hey, Lucas, how many serious mistakes have you made so far this lifetime?
Too many.
Hey, Wada, or Dr. Ganem.
Too many times, Larry. Just too many times, man.
Hey, Adrian, how many serious mistakes have you made?
Too many.
Hey, AJ, or Dr. Katari, how many mistakes have you made?
Way too many.
Hey, Sarah, or Dr. Stoker, how many serious mistakes have you made?
Oh, far too many.
Hey, Christian.
Too many, mate.
Hey, Singwat, how many serious mistakes have you made?
Too many, Larry. Too many.
Thanks, Singwat. Okay, so it seems no matter where you go or whoever you talk to, when you ask about how many mistakes or serious mistakes, you get the same answer, too many. But how many? So that's something that we're just about to release, and it's my hope that we can also get all of your contractors up to speed on these concepts with those 14 10-minute lessons that they could do once or twice a week as well too, because I think, as we all know, getting contractors into the training room is a nightmare. And I'm not sure what happened to this slide here, everybody, because it should say Legos for the public trainer certification, and it should say 7th, 8th, and 9th of September. We are going to Dubai to do a public train the trainer the week after that, and I'm not sure how my slide got mixed up. So that is September 7th, 8th, and 9th, and with the help of the folks at the ASSP, we'll send you out a PDF, a flyer on the workshop, the agenda, and stuff like that, and hopefully you could attend in September. And that's it for the session, everybody. Do we have any questions? I know I'm a bit over time, so please, if you've got any questions, I'd love to hear them.
Thank you, Larry. Confirm you can hear me.
Yes, I can.
All right. Thank you very much for the presentation. Very elaborate and interesting. So, colleagues on call, if you have any questions, you can just. I see one hand. Okay, that's just. Oh, someone is clapping, not really. So, if you have any question, you can drop it on the Q&A question. Also, raise your hand so we can call on you. So you can ask your question. Though we've gone a bit overboard of time, but then we'll be able to pick. We're going to take some questions.
I usually don't get too many questions. Even, I mean, as I recall, even in Abuja, we, I don't think there's 80 folks there or whatever. I think maybe we had one question or something like that afterwards. So, don't be like the Russian guys. You guys can just ask questions just to try to be polite. It's okay. I'm sort of used to it, but hopefully we could see some of you folks for the full-on trainer certification. We did one in Lagos. Nigerite hosted it for us about a month and a half ago, and we're hoping to do another one. We're not sure exactly whether it'll be at a hotel or whether we're going to get a company to host it in Lagos or around the Lagos area, but hopefully we could see some of you in September as well.
Okay, thank you very much. So I don't know if Mr. James is on call. Actually, he's usually in our custom. Appreciate you with our related token, certificate of recognition for the job well done and the knowledge that you have impacted in us today.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much,
Mr.
guys.
James is supposed to do it. Is the delegates representing us? Yeah, I think he's not on call, so this will be sent to your email.
Okay,
we want to thank you, and we always look forward to anytime we call on you. You're always willing to also accept our invitation. Yeah.
Well, and hopefully,
so thank you very much, Larry.
Thank you all.
So much.
Thank you, and hopefully I'll see some of you in Chicago for the PDC as well there, right? Some of you are coming to Chicago as well?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes. Part of my ESCO are coming, and a lot. Daniel, we are all coming, by God will.
We have our executives there.
Well, because it's the best party. It's always the best party going to the West Africa chapter. I remember Tim telling me, no, Larry, this is the best party at the ASSP. You got to come. You got to come. And it was a great time. It was a great time. So thank you. Okay. Bye-bye, everybody.
Hello.
Hi.
Sec.
Bye. Yeah,
Larry,
thank you to Larry.
Thank you so much.
So we'll just call on the president-elect. Yeah, Larry, before you go, we're supposed to... Hello, Larry. Can you hear? We're supposed to give a closing remark. President Shehu, you can just give us a closing remark. I don't think the
okay.
All right. Is on call.
All right. Thank you.
Hello, President Shehu, closing remark.
Yes.
Okay. All right, please.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Larry. This was a very impactful knowledge we acquired today, and we are proud of your concern to impact knowledge to Nigerian chapter. Permit me to recognize the presence of Mr. Ashok Galapati, Mr. Rama Krishna Chari, and also Mr. Raja Asim. They are all from our Regional 9 Global. We appreciate your your invite. Thank you so much. And also, we appreciate all that participated in this impactful webinar. We are proud of our members and the invitees as well. And this will go a long way to make us happy and also log on to all those things. In fact, I really look forward that next training in Nigeria, as you have mentioned. You were there in March and April for that one, and we will have registered actively to communicate with all our members to make sure that something like that has been impacted. But we look forward to another opportunity for that. We look forward to meeting all of us in Chicago, so that we continue with what we are doing. Thank you, and God bless. We just apology for those that we have not been able to join. You could have seen a large crowd of our members, but today, in the weekend and a lot of activities, we had another first workshop, webinar by our WISE, Women in Safety Excellence. So that would have many people were exhausted. So that's what led to that. And because we want to respect your presence here, we always slot you at the time. When Mr. Mike was in communication with me, he slated that 18. We had a program on 18, but we have to force ourselves to make sure that we accommodate the two webinars in the same day. And we are so proud of all of you. Thank you, and God bless.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, bye, everybody. Bye. See you in September.
Bye. Thank you very much.
See you in.
Larry, Larry, if you can just take a picture, maybe everybody just unmute your video. Let's take a picture. Unmute your video. Let's take a picture.
Okay.
All right.
Unmute your video. Let's take a picture.
Okay.
Everybody's got to. Okay. All right. Okay. We're gonna get our pictures taken now.
Mr. Larry, where is Mike?
More people on meeting.
Thanks, Larry. Thanks, Esco.
Okay. All right. Thank you for the wonderful smile. Thank you so much. Have a lovely day. Bye. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Mackenzie, bye. Thank you very much.
See you in September, hopefully. Okay. Bye-bye.
Mackenzie.
Bye.